She hadn't spoken in over a year. But the moment the gorilla sat down in front of her, something changed. Not slightly, not gradually, immediately. Kibo weighed 230 pounds. He was 41 years old, arthritic in one shoulder, slow in the way that only comes from decades of existing in the same space. The younger gorillas at the reserve gave him a wide berth. The handlers had learned not to rush him. He didn't sit down for anyone, but he sat down for her. The other visitors had moved on 20 minutes ago. Maya's father, David, had barely noticed. He did this at every new place they visited. He let Maya set the pace. Some days she stood at a window for 40 minutes. Some days she walked straight back to the car. Today she hadn't moved from the glass in almost half an hour. David stood a few feet behind her, hands in his pockets, watching Kibo the way you watch something you don't entirely trust, respectfully, quietly, without taking your eyes off it. The gorilla hadn't moved either, forearms resting on his knees, head slightly tilted, not curious, not aggressive, intentional, like he was waiting for something specific. David took one slow step forward. He knew the glass was 4 inches thick. He knew Kibo had been at the reserve for 38 years and had never shown aggression toward a visitor. He knew all of that, and he was still afraid, because the way Kibo was looking at Maya wasn't the way an animal looks at a stranger. It was the way you look at someone you recognize. Then Kibo made a sound, low, barely audible through the glass. Not a grunt, not a warning, something softer, almost like a single syllable exhaled slowly, just to confirm he was still there. David froze. Maya didn't. She leaned forward, just slightly, just an inch, and placed her palm flat against the glass. David hadn't seen her reach out to touch anything in 14 months. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He watched his daughter's hand against the glass, and Kibo perfectly still on the other side of it, and he thought, she's not afraid of him. Then Kibo made the sound again. And Maya did something no one in that building expected. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what came before. 18 months earlier, Maya had been by every account a loud child. Not loud in the difficult sense, loud in the way that fills a house. She narrated everything. She sang while she ate breakfast. She asked questions in the car until David's ears rang. Her kindergarten teacher had written on her mid-year report, Maya is a verbal processor. She thinks out loud. It's a gift. Then came March. David doesn't talk about the details publicly, and this video won't either. What matters is this: there was an accident. Maya was in it. 2 other people were not okay afterward. Maya was physically fine. Everything else took the damage. She stopped speaking the day after. Not gradually, not reluctantly. She just stopped. Mid-sentence, mid-morning, as if someone had reached inside her and turned a dial all the way down. The silence wasn't angry. It wasn't defiant. It was just complete. The therapists explained it carefully. Trauma doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like stillness. The brain, overwhelmed, finds one thing it can control and holds on. For Maya, that thing was her voice. David tried to be patient. He was not always patient. He was a father watching his daughter disappear into herself. And there is no amount of clinical language that makes that easy to sit with at 2 in the morning. By month 6, he'd stopped expecting progress. He just focused on presence, being near her, taking her places, letting her set the pace. That's how they ended up at the Limpopo Valley Reserve. A long weekend, a change of scenery. His sister had suggested it. Get her outside, get her moving, just go somewhere different. The staff had mentioned Kibo on the way in. He's our oldest resident, very calm, but he doesn't really engage with visitors much anymore. Don't be surprised if he ignores you. Maya had walked straight to his habitat without looking at anything else. But here's what David didn't know yet. That wasn't their first meeting. 2 days earlier, the afternoon they'd arrived, David had been checking into the guest lodge when Maya slipped out the side door. He'd been gone 4 minutes. He found her standing at the edge of the reserve's outer fence, maybe 100 meters from the main habitat. Kibo had been in the outer yard. He'd been watching her. David had taken Maya's hand and walked her back inside, his heart hammering, telling himself it was fine. The fence was secure. It was fine. He hadn't thought about it again. He was thinking about it now, back at the glass. Maya's hand was still pressed flat against it. Kibo hadn't moved. The low sound had faded, but the silence it left behind felt different from before. Not empty, expectant. David was close enough now that he could see the reflection of Maya's face in the glass, alongside Kibo's. He watched his daughter's expression the way he'd learned to watch it, carefully, looking for the micro-signals, the tiny shifts that were the only emotional language she'd had for over a year. Her jaw was unclenched. That alone was unusual. One of the reserve's junior handlers, a young man named Sifo, had noticed the situation from the path and was now standing very still about 15 feet away. He'd radioed Dr. Reyes quietly, "You might want to come to the main habitat," and was now doing exactly what his training told him to do in unpredictable situations. Nothing. Slowly, Kibo shifted his weight, not toward the glass, just a small adjustment, the way you shift when you've been sitting too long. And then he made the sound a third time, softer now, almost inward, less a vocalization and more a vibration, the kind of low chest resonance that primatologists call a contact call. It's what gorillas use within a group to say, "I'm here. You're not alone. I know you're there." David didn't know that's what it was, but something in his chest responded to it anyway, the way bodies sometimes understand things before minds do. Maya opened her mouth. David's breath stopped. He watched, he stared. The way you stare at something you've been waiting for so long that when it finally starts to happen, you're terrified that looking too hard will stop it. Her lips moved, and then a sound came out. Not a word, not speech, something smaller and older than words. A single soft note, almost a hum, exhaled slowly like she was matching something, like she was responding to a frequency she'd been hearing for a long time and only just found the courage to answer. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. The silence after it was enormous. David pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. Sifo, 15 feet away, looked down at the ground. Not to look away, but because some moments require that kind of privacy. Kibo made the sound again. Maya made it back. Back and forth. 3 times. 4. Not complex, not language, just presence, answering presence. A call and a response so quiet that anyone passing on the path outside would have heard nothing at all. But inside that corridor of glass and morning light, something was moving that hadn't moved in 14 months. Dr. Reyes arrived at the edge of the path. She took one look, the child at the glass, the old gorilla perfectly still, the sounds passing between them like something being carefully handed over, and she stopped walking. She had a PhD in animal behavior. She'd published 3 papers on great ape communication. She'd spent 11 years with this animal. She had no framework for what she was watching. For the first time in over a year, Maya wasn't silent. They stayed for another 20 minutes. The sounds tapered off slowly, the way a conversation does when both people have said what needed saying, and what's left is just the comfort of being near each other. Kibo eventually shifted to face the inner yard, following some internal routine that 40 years had carved into him. Maya watched him go. She didn't reach for the glass again. She didn't make a sound. She just watched him until he was fully out of sight, the way you watch something you want to remember exactly as it is. Then she turned around. David was standing 3 feet behind her, and his face was a mess, not crying exactly but close to it in the way that men who have been holding things together for 14 months look when something finally cracks the surface. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms slightly, just enough to make the offer without forcing it. Maya walked into them. He held her for a long time. Some part of him understood instinctively that words right now were the wrong currency, that whatever had just happened at that glass existed in a register that language would only cheapen. So he just stood there with his daughter in his arms in the middle of that corridor, while the morning light moved across the floor and Sifo quietly disappeared back down the path and gave them the space that people who understand grief know to give. Dr. Reyes stayed a little longer, not intrusively. She kept her distance, pretending to check something on her clipboard, but she watched. And later, when she tried to describe what she'd seen to her colleagues, she kept stopping mid-sentence, not because she lacked vocabulary but because the vocabulary kept feeling insufficient. What she eventually settled on was this. Kibo had always been what she called an emotionally literate animal. Not in a mystical sense. She was careful about that. Careful not to project. Careful to stay inside what the science could actually support. But in a documented, observable sense. Over 11 years she had watched him respond differently to people in distress. A keeper going through a divorce who Kibo had started sitting closer to during feeding rounds. A volunteer who'd lost her mother and found Kibo placing his hand flat against the inner fence during her shifts for 3 weeks afterward. Small things, consistent things, things that didn't fit neatly into any framework but kept happening anyway. She had a theory which she'd never published because she wasn't sure how to defend it peer review. The theory was that Kibo, in his 41 years of living alongside humans, had developed an acute sensitivity to a particular kind of silence. Not the silence of someone calm, not the silence of someone bored or distracted, the specific textured silence of someone carrying something they can't put down. He'd heard it in Maya from 100 meters away, through a fence, on a Thursday afternoon, and he'd sat down. David called Dr. Anaya Moyo that evening from the small porch outside their lodge room while Maya slept inside. Dr. Moyo was the 3rd therapist they'd tried, a child and family specialist in Johannesburg, who had been working with Maya for 4 months with the patient. Undramatic consistency that David had come to rely on, even when it felt like nothing was happening. He told her what he'd seen. His voice kept catching. He apologized for that twice, and she told him to stop apologizing. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something he wrote down on the back of a receipt he found in his jacket pocket, because he didn't have anything else. She said, "We spend so much time trying to get children to reconnect through language, through explanation, through naming what happened. But sometimes the nervous system needs something different first. It needs to feel safe in its body before it can find its words. It needs something that says, you exist, I see you, and I'm not afraid of what's inside you." That can come from a person. Sometimes it comes from somewhere unexpected. She paused. Then she said, "Whatever happened at that glass, don't analyze it, don't frame it, don't make it into a milestone she has to live up to. Just let her have it as a thing that happened. Let it be hers." David looked at the receipt for a long time after he hung up. Then he folded it and put it in his wallet behind his driver's license, where he kept the things he needed to find again. The next morning, Maya ate breakfast on the lodge porch and watched two warthogs cross the grass near the waterhole and pointed at them, actually pointed, her finger extended, her eyes tracking them across the yard, and David watched her point and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't name but recognized. She was present, not recovered, not fixed. Those words had stopped meaning anything to him months ago anyway, but present in a way she hadn't been in a long time, eyes tracking, body leaning slightly forward, something behind her face that was paying attention to the world rather than turned inward away from it. He didn't comment on it. Dr. Moyo had told him early on, "Don't narrate her progress back to her. Don't say you seem better today, or I noticed you did this. It puts the weight of your hope onto her and she can feel it. Just be there. Just be normal." So he just said, "Look at that one," and pointed at the larger warthog, and Maya watched it and almost smiled. Almost. That was enough. On the last morning, their bags were already in the car. They had an hour before they needed to leave for the drive back. David had expected Maya to want to return to the main habitat. He'd half planned for it, had mentally prepared to ask Sifo if they could have a few minutes, but Maya didn't go toward the main habitat. She went to the outer fence, the same stretch of fence where David had found her 2 days ago. She walked to it with a directness that told him she'd known exactly where she was going before she left the lodge, and he followed her at a distance, giving her the 30 meters of space that had become their unspoken agreement in the past 14 months. Kibo was in the outer yard. David didn't know if that was routine or something else. He suspected Dr. Rees might have had something to do with it, might have quietly ensured Kibo had access to the outer yard that morning, but he never asked, and it didn't matter. Kibo looked up when Maya approached the fence. He didn't come closer. She didn't call out. There was no sound this time, no back and forth, no contact call through glass. Just a child and a very old gorilla standing in the early morning light, with 8 meters of open air between them, looking at each other with the particular quality of attention that exists between two things that have already said what needed saying and don't need to say it again. It lasted maybe 4 minutes. Then Maya turned around and walked back to her father. She didn't speak, but she reached up and took his hand, which she hadn't done in 14 months either, and they walked back to the car together, and David kept his eyes forward and his grip steady and didn't say a word the entire way. He cried in the bathroom of a petrol station 40 minutes outside the reserve while Maya waited in the car eating a packet of crisps. He ran the tap so she wouldn't hear. He wasn't crying because he was sad. He wasn't crying because he thought everything was going to be okay now. He'd stopped making that mistake a long time ago. He was crying because for the first time since March he could imagine a version of the future. Not a fixed version, not a guaranteed one, just the outline of one, faint and uncertain, the way shapes look before the light fully comes up. That was something he hadn't had in a long time. Maya didn't find her voice that day. Recovery isn't one moment, it's 1,000 small ones, most of them unremarkable, most of them invisible to everyone except the people watching closely enough to notice. It's a Tuesday morning 6 weeks later when she says pass the juice at breakfast and then goes quiet again like she surprised herself. It's a session with Dr. Moyo 3 months on where she draws a picture instead of speaking, and it's the most communication she's offered in any session so far. It's slow and non-linear and unglamorous, and it asks more of the people around her than they sometimes feel they have. But something happened at that fence, something happened at that glass, something that a 41-year-old gorilla named Kibo offered to a 7-year-old girl without being asked, without being trained to, without anything except the particular patience of a creature who had spent 4 decades learning to exist quietly alongside a species that never quite learned to do the same. He didn't fix her, he didn't heal her, he didn't do anything that would hold up in a clinical study or fit cleanly into a journal paper. He just sat down. He just said, in the only language available to him, "I hear something in you. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not leaving." And for a little girl who had gone silent because the world had stopped feeling safe enough to speak into, that was everything. She didn't find her voice that day, but something finally answered back.